Welcome back to Big Brave Business. I'm your host, Sarah K. Heater. Big Brave Business is a podcast where we challenge the status quo of traditional business practices. So if you're ready to challenge norms, rewrite the rules, and redefine what it means to lead with courage and integrity, then grab a notebook and let's dive in. Welcome back to Big Brave Business. I know I say this all the time, but I'm just a happy person and I love my podcast. So I am thrilled to introduce you to a new friend of mine, Joanna Horton McPherson. And we met at NAWBO. So I've talked on this podcast quite a bit about getting involved at NAWBO, the National Association of Women Business Owners here in Phoenix. But let me tell you a little bit about her. Joanna Horton McPherson is a leader, serial entrepreneur, and speaker who specializes in the deeper aspects of leadership and personal fulfillment. Joanna helps mission-driven business people find their transformative message. Joanna focuses on inspiring the next generation of global leadership. She has founded nonprofits and schools, one of which is near her home in Costa Rica. An advanced practitioner of Buddhist meditation and poet, Joanna teaches that working with our mind and hearts is our power. Joanna obtained her master's in education from Harvard University and serves as president-elect for the National Association of Women Business Owners Phoenix chapter. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Yay. We have really fun conversations. And so it was one of those things where we were already chit-chatting before we hit record. It's like, we have to just record because otherwise we'll talk the whole hour away. So yes, I feel like, again, and I've said this many times on this show, you can tell just from Joanna's bio why we are friends and why we connect and why I feel so drawn to you and knew I had to have you on the show. Thank you for agreeing to be here. Let's just there's so many interesting things about you, but let's just get into the best part, which is where you are right now. What does being big and brave in your business look like?
Great question. Before we recorded, I said, I think the best way I can talk about what being big and brave is working on myself in my business, which is a very vulnerable conversation, but it's also the realest one I can have because our businesses, for some of us who start our business based on our service we provide, which is what I do, working with people, when you're like a coach is like, I will help you. And then if you do that, you actually need help to make sure you're honest. The biggest brave is, how do I answer this? Working in my real life, Sarah. I work in my real life. Not the life I want to have, but the life I have. You understand what I mean by that?
Tell me more. Tell me more.
Oh gosh. So who am I? I am a woman. I'm a mother. I'm a wife. I own a business. We have these multitudes in us. And I find I don't do them all as well as I'd like. And there is a bat I could beat myself up with about that. So the work that I do is to stay focused on showing up and really never falling into the negative self-talk story that we all could fall into.
It's interesting because I've said many times before on this podcast, but it's worth repeating that one thing about entrepreneurship that I've found is that it shines a spotlight on all of the shit, like all of the things. You can't hide from any of it. It's all going to come back up, even if you can figure out how to kind of work through it just to get by. It's gonna come back up again until you deal with it. And I think that's one of the reasons why coaching, mentorship, and frankly, therapy are so important for entrepreneurs. And yeah, it's interesting. Some of the things that have come up for me include definitely confidence, which is interesting. I just met with somebody else who I met at a NAWBO event. And when we met up in person one-on-one, she said to me, can I ask you, I want what you have. You're so confident when you walk into a room. And I started laughing because I think I started my business 5 years ago. Then COVID happened and everything was online, and getting confident showing up on Zoom was so much easier than being confident walking into a room. And
Mm.
then as things started opening back up, carrying that confidence with me that I built up on Zoom was easier.
Mhm.
Also, I'm confident in my business and what I do, but there is still so much, especially with for women, how we dress, how we look, our weight, our hair, our teeth, our skin, everything, right? Everything that comes up before you even get to the what if they actually see the real me,
Yeah.
which is
Oh
way
yeah.
scarier than all that other stuff.
Oh yeah.
That's all just surface. So it is so hard. It is so hard for everyone to walk into a room and put yourself out there. So that's definitely one thing. I also would say for me, like my money story has been a big part of it. My relationship with money, my beliefs about money, how I was raised to understand not just financial literacy, which I would say I had very, very minimal
Yeah.
financial, barely financially literate, but also confidence with money, security with money, bravery with money, comfort with money, like all of that stuff is still a work in progress, but that's kind of what it's looked like for me. So
Wow.
I'm curious, what are some things that have come up for you?
Yeah, you really hit on some major nails for me. The first thing about you said about the spotlight, I think a lot about confidence because what I didn't put in my bio was that I was a professional actor for 30 years. I don't know why I didn't put that in that bio. I was started doing public speaking at age 13. And that sounds like the story of someone who is confident. What I never, you don't see in the bio is that I was someone who didn't, who, if you said my name, I would flush and turn purple and wish that I was in a cave and was invisible. And I don't know where that all came from as a young child, but it was like, she's not meeting her potential in class. She doesn't speak. She's not contributing. I was not showing up. I couldn't be present in myself with people. See, it's not just with others, it's really in myself. You know what I'm saying? My path in acting was like the actor shows up, you said spotlight, shining a spotlight on who you are in front of people. And so the stage isn't really about the audience, it's about being seen altogether, like being seen for who you are. And I did not know how to do that. So I spent years, Sarah, I mean, years, decades training in what it takes inside of me to be seen. And when you say the real me, I think about the validation, whether it's the things we think about like appearance or the things on the outside, like am I successful? Do I sound smart? Do I whatever it is, whatever thing we want our audience to believe about us. We have this thing where we're like, we want to manage their perception of us. But this gets to sort of what I do now. The whole game is actually really understanding what matters to you because you can't think someone's thoughts for them. We don't actually know what they're thinking. And the stakes of having your spotlight shine on us, it's not what they think, it's what we think. Like, I'm afraid of what they're thinking, but that's not the same as what they're thinking. Do you understand? You know what I mean? So it all actually comes down to us. It comes down to ourselves. And that spotlight shining on us is only the thing that you see in yourself that you're not okay with. So then what do we do? That conversation about confidence for me really comes into like how I show up in my values and knowing what I care about and what matters. And this matters a lot, especially pain point, big brave in business. I am working with a lot of people with money more than I ever have. That's bringing up a lot for me around values because I came from a nonprofit world. My first businesses were nonprofit arts, working with youth, telling stories, theater of the oppressed, very social justice oriented, immigrant youth, incarcerated youth, foster youth, youth with autism, homeless youth, all these things. Very driven around the ills of the world and how youth are experiencing those ills and need a voice to fix them. So when you generate wealth for the person in service, it can feel like you're part of the problem instead of part of the solution. And money historically had been part of capitalism, part of the exploitation system, part of power, patriarchy. So,
It's the root of all evil, right?
I mean, according to some, And I
That's
mean,
the
I had to
catchphrase.
really face like, what's my problem with making a lot of money?
Hmm.
Not for me only, but for everybody I work with. What is my issue with that? And it comes from this disconnect in me around service. It's not a real service. I'm not really serving anyone if I'm not about abundance also, because it's not service for no pay. It's a dead end. It's an input and there's no output. That's not like the law of the universe. If we're going to operate in like the world of abundance and universe and flow, there needs to be input output. So there has to be like money coming in, money spent, and people receiving money, and people in there. And that flow is like we're disconnected in the nonprofit world because we're singing for our supper. Services are free. And if to some extent, we need free services. But at the same time, people need to be paid. And so the thing I'm working with now is how for those people who need free services, who don't have access to money, to learn how to make their own money and shift who owns. I mean, we're getting to the deep end here, Sarah, but like who owns the means of production? Who owns the ability to make life on their terms? Not just entrepreneurs shouldn't just be people who have money, but who need to know how to make it. So that's an authentic mission-driven value that I carry.
Oh,
Where do we even go in this conversation just now?
this is no, this is it. This is the thing. And I think this is what I spend every day thinking about. And one of the things that I wanted to be a kind of an overarching theme in season 2 of Big Brave Business that we're recording right now is how do you build a business as an anti-capitalist, right? How do you become an entrepreneur and grow a company and grow a business and scale it? And I plan one day to sell my company. And how do you do that? How do you have that mission and then also like have anti-capitalist values? And there feels like there should be a natural rejection of money and wealth building that goes with that. But really, like what my personal anti-capitalism is really all about is redefining kind of what wealth means and also building wealth not just for me but building wealth for like
Yeah.
everyone, right? Like there's enough
Right.
wealth that exists, we just need to redistribute that wealth, and that includes me, right? And so trying to do the work that I do both on this podcast and with my clients and like my team and building the company that I'm building is about redistributing the wealth that exists. And I think that's why we connected so quickly, because I think, and if you're listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, this is a whole lot of terms, this is a whole, like, these are some big concepts, just try to hang in there with us, because I think that when you start to really dig into this stuff, first of all, it's fun. It's really interesting. And
Yeah.
second of all, this is the bigger, braver conversation at hand. It is, yes, it is brave to start a business. It is brave to start a business with the intention to be able to pay your bills. That is brave. To choose to start something from nothing and build it. That is brave. But when we're thinking truly big and brave business, we need to look at what are the systems that are and the institutions that are inherently in place. Why is it that starting a business in general is an opportunity, and especially for, I'm going to say women, but what I really mean is
Yeah.
non-cis
Yeah.
heteronormative white men, right? For everyone else, why is entrepreneurship particularly a big opportunity? So I don't know, does any of that kind of resonate?
Yeah.
What comes up for you?
My mind is blooming. People say my like mind blown. It's my mind opening like a flower. I
Love
love
that.
the anti-capitalist conversation because I'm not at the point in my business where I am actually distributing profit share to my team. But this is a model I'm living into in my business as a way of generating collective wealth. And it starts just like we started the conversation, it starts here with ourselves first, because this is what I think, Sarah. In a business, I am the entrepreneur, quote unquote, entrepreneur. I started this thing. It's my system I'm creating. And I have people on my team, but the model is broken if I'm making the same old business as usual. I'm the capitalist and you're just serving me, right? That's drinking our own bathwater. What do we do instead of that? My team are like mini micro entrepreneurs who are experimental in their own right. iterating in their own right. They have room and support from me to be like entrepreneurs within their lane in the business. And their impact in the business will increase the profit, not just for the owner, but for them as well. And that way, I want them as a mentor, because I mentor people too. When you get to this place in your career, like people are like, hey, can you like share what you're doing? They can share that in their business. And they may never be an entrepreneur in their own right, but they can affect their children, their sisters, their families, and start to realize how there is another way of success being success for other people. And you just have to open, I feel like you have to open the doors and allow more access and opportunity for the people around us to profit and grow with us. So I view, just to get back to the capitalist thing, it's really around advantage and taking it. And then the end result of that, if you're like in the in group, it's great. And you're just over here growing your money and your power and your influence. But what the effect is people don't have influence. They don't have power and they don't have money. They're just fueling your machine and your rocket. If we are profit sharing, we open up avenues for people to rise with us. That inspires me.
I love everything that you said about that. And that is interesting because I can see that in my own team. I can see how I've structured things in my own team, not necessarily having that clear of an intention about it, but just I think when you mentioned core values, when you approach things from a core value perspective and those influence how you make decisions, you do things without even necessarily understanding what the kind of why that's aligned. You just know that this meets your core values and this. So I think that's probably how I've come to that, is because that really is at heart what kind of leader I am and want to be. And then I say a lot about my past corporate life, my 9 to 5 life, that I did a lot of work that I didn't care about for / with people I didn't like. And then I came home and the people who I loved and the things that mattered the most I didn't have anything left to give them, right? I didn't get to really have that in my life to the extent that I would want to, right? And with our one precious life that we have. So that's one thing that I really want to do differently, is I want to do work that I care about with people who I love and respect and admire. And so part of it is truly knowing that I'm structuring offers in a way that through my marketing, I'm attracting the people that I want to work with, right? And then and that is disruptors, change makers. I like to say good troublemakers, people who want to shake things up and do things differently, and they have a voice and they have something to say, and it's truly going to make the world a better place. I want to help them amplify that. And then I create offers around that idea of amplification and that idea of a rising tide lifts all boats, and knowing that what I have to offer them is literally the whole point is to help them also build their own platform, build their own voice, use their own voice, etc. And then that justifies that exchange of energy and value, as you were talking about, the input output, that yes, they're paying me. And kind of something that comes up for me sometimes that's related. So I want to say this one last thing. I saw you take notes and I want to kind of volley it back to you. But one thing that has come up for me sometimes with especially like the online coaching industry, because I feel like there's a lot of people who create coaching programs to coach coaches. And sometimes there's criticism of that among like business ethics conversationalists, which I like to be in those spaces. There's some criticism that feels sort of like network marketing or MLM, like some kind of pyramid scheme where coaches coach coaches to coach coaches. And at first, yes, there's something about that could bother me, but just that inherently doesn't bother me. And the reason why is because so what? So if we could all get to the point where we're all just paying each other, but we're all making $10,000 or more a month, then isn't it okay that we're all isn't that actually kind of like a commune. Like we're all just making each other better and paying each other and sharing wealth to the point that we all make a livable wage. I mean, I feel like that is a revolutionary act in itself. So as much as I'm critical, and if you've listened to this podcast for a while, A, thank you, and B, I can be critical of online coaching, but that part of it, that's not the
Yeah.
problem. Like,
Yeah, I
man,
see what you're saying.
if all women specifically, because we met at NABO, if all women specifically just shared our wealth, pooled our resources together, we would raise all of us. Right. I
Yeah,
really truly believe that.
I 100% and beyond agree with that. And we are creating a world we want to live in that way. You are, I am. It is so interesting, the distinction you just made, because I agree with you. And I've actually thought of this myself, speaking of offers, of like, I would really love to train their coaches. I haven't gotten to that point where that's a deep enough conversation where that's become a product or a process. Because for me, my background's in education. There's a lot that I want to think through going into that. But here's what, and the conversation around quality control drives the whole thing for me because it's in service of what? And I think about this as a leader in leader roles. I feel like I have to put quotes around the word leader because leader sounds like a resume thing. And I really believe leadership is whatever you're being an example of. That's leadership. It's when it's for something. And it's usually, hopefully, beyond you and beyond all of us. We get into the soup when we're like, I serve this person or I serve this dollar sign, this bottom line. That you're cooked. You're totally cooked because that's not in service of something that inspires anybody. But what you want to be about is if you're doing coaching coaches, in service of what? In service of helping others have awakenings that shift things in their life. I agree with you. How is that bad? But it has to actually work, right?
Right.
That's the quality control piece.
Yes.
And we can't talk ourselves. There's a difference between what we want to be true, which is I want it to work, versus it being true and it working and it's shifting people.
Yeah.
And when you talk about content, like you're saying, marketing people, working with good troublemakers, doing work you care about with people you love, respect, and admire. I think getting back to the business conversation, this whole thing I'm doing now, I used to work with actors. I trained people how to get on stage and feel confidence. I mean, people say like, I want to become more confident, but what actually really is things you no longer do that fall away and allow the essential real self, the self that doesn't need to be managed, to come forward. And that being coming forward is what is very magnetic. It's pure energy. It's pure essence of what matters to you. You're vibing with what matters to you, why you're here, why you're the one who's valuable to be like saying, have the mic right now and be saying what you're saying. The things we stop doing to put garbage on top of it is the work. It's not like we need to build anything up. Like you don't need to get ready to talk. It's not like you need to become valuable. So I think about the product I offer with my clients. The quality is in the very, very inner spaces of looking at what isn't sitting right and isn't working and changing not that thing, because you really never cut those things out of yourself. You can't like surgically remove the ugly mess we have in us. You relate to it differently. You make it make sense in the context of what you're about. And then it starts to change your conversation with when you go into the world and you're like, my clients talk on stage, they go and share their story. The mess we used to feel like we had to cover for actually becomes the value that you offer other people when you change how you relate to it.
Yeah. I want to ask you a nosy question because I like you and I like what you do. So, how do you get your clients?
They meet me.
Uh-huh.
They meet me in person. They know me because I don't have traction through my socials yet. I don't know enough about social media to be like, I'm banging on that platform. Like, that's not how people find me. They hear me. And I actually meet people in person who'll say, like, I love this video about this and this and that. But I feel like that's just value. And I've kind of put it in that realm. Social media is just value of providing people insight. I love working with my own anger. I'm sober. I've come through a lot of in myself So people are like, you have it all together. No, I don't. I just know how to work with it. I've had to study this so much because I'm a dramatic person. Like I have to work with myself so much that I can see things a little bit more clearly than I did before. And that matters to people when I talk about anger, feeling stuck, like looking at other people thinking you need to do it that way, and like forgetting that no one can do it better than you can. And like, how do you center on those things? My clients might hear me on a talk and or recently the last client I got was someone who watched my content on LinkedIn and then just referred me randomly cold to someone else.
Wow.
And that was a first. But I feel like more of that's going to happen because I'm just putting out like real stuff, genuine. And that's very vulnerable. Because I'm like, my team's like, you actually just need to talk about your real life. And I'm like, but actually, that's the last thing I want to do. You know,
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about my life. If suddenly I'm like, I'm looking at Joanne on the screen, I'm like, did she become one of these Instagram, like, look at my life all together people? Because I don't resonate with that. I
Yeah.
feel like if I can show my brokenness and hold it the way I actually hold it in my life, maybe that will serve somebody. So that's what I try to do.
I think that's what's interesting about social media is I think what actually resonates. Like there are things there are certainly people who have like an aesthetic, I don't know, personal brand, I guess, demonstration online for you to watch that you can sort of live vicariously through. And certainly like that gets a lot of views and so you can monetize it that way. But I actually really think that the original like purpose of social media, right, was for us to be social in sharing our lives with each other and a way for us to stay connected virtually and in a way to deepen our connections virtually. And it
Yeah.
has gotten so far away from that and so contorted to be like, what's your marketing? What's your messaging? What's this? What's that? But I think the reality is you don't necessarily have to go on and post pictures of your kids because especially if you're trying to build like an external audience, that's a dangerous slippery slope. But to talk about the fact that you have kids and to talk about how that affects your perspective on the world and on what you're doing, and that is what matters. And what's so fascinating is you said people want to know like, oh, essentially you have it figured out, like how do you deal with this? I want to learn from you, I want your support, I want your help. And what you're really saying is they're realizing that after hearing your mess, which is kind of funny.
Yeah. I just feel like we never graduate from these things. If I've learned anything over 43 years, is that there is no adulthood phase it's going to hit where it all settles into place. Like there isn't some chapter we hit where we finally grow up. It's just you real time have to make yourself grow up on purpose or it never will happen. And the way I view that is realizing that I was drinking because I couldn't manage my emotions. I was upset about my life, which is a great life, and really didn't know how to be a voice in the world. Like what we're doing right now, Sarah, 3 years ago, about 3 years ago, I'd say it's shifted to I just had to decide to value myself enough to do this. That's the only reason I'm here right now, because I didn't. For my whole life, I just was like, who cares what I have to say? Like, it doesn't matter what I have to say. And to be able to now be on the other side of that didn't change a lot, except that I let go of it being about me. And I'm like, I feel like some of what I deal with really could serve others. And I just struggled so hard for like, how am I going to be contributing to the world? It still does, matters so much to me to engage with the greater world that's so hurt and broken. And we don't know how to do things. And it's not like I'm like, I have the answer. Because if the second someone says that, you just need to run, like run away. Right? What I have is ways that I know work with my practice and myself. And my clients now would agree, like their lives feel like their life is different and they've changed because we don't cut those things out. Those problems don't really go away. What we do is we become bigger than the problems and we become more of a solution and more of a contribution. and it starts to just shifting. That's the whole magic of transformation. Put that in quotes too. It's nothing other than coming from another perspective in oneself.
First, let me say in response to that, I'm so glad that you're here. And I genuinely do believe that the world is a better place with you in it. And I'm so glad that you're here. So first, let me just start there. I really mean that. And then I want to come back to anger. I want to come back to because you mentioned anger, and this has been such an interesting thing for me because I've said on this podcast recently that my 30s have been about two things. But what I said recently was my 30s have been about relearning how to play. But one
Yeah.
thing I don't think I've spent a lot of time talking about on this podcast is that also my 30s have been about channeling my anger. And for a long time, anger is something that I prided myself that I wasn't. And
Mhm.
I felt like even when I started to like tap into feminism, I was like, okay, I guess I consider myself a feminist, but not like the angry kind.
Mhm.
And what's funny is a series of things in my 20s that led to traumatic experiences that I was frankly angry about. And
Yep.
then kind of topped all that off with getting laid off, Trump being elected, like these things and that kicked off my, the first time, that kicked off my 30s. And that coming out of some like personal traumatic experiences as well. It was like I went into my 30s and I was like, no, fuck it. I'm angry. I am angry. And honestly, once I started to sit with that of like, I didn't even know I was capable of being as angry as I was. And once I actually acknowledged that and sat with it, I thought it was going to be really scary, but it actually was so empowering to
Mhm.
actually get to know the angry side of myself. And I think that what I've since learned and what I say is, first of all, if you don't have anger, if you don't have any anger, you're not an interesting person. And second of all,
That's
anger is what fuels revolutions. Like no revolution ever happened from nothing revolutionary ever happened from people who weren't angry. Like you
complacency. Yeah.
correct. And I think that, yes, certainly there is unhealthy, dangerous, harmful anger, and anger is not an opportunity to harm other people or yourself. Like, I'm not, obviously, I'm not an advocate for that. But I think that actually getting to know our anger and spending time with our anger and really getting to know the angry side of ourselves, because there is a side of you that's angry. And so getting to know the angry side of yourself and like, why are you angry? And how can I love you? How can I love even the angriest part of me instead
Wow.
of trying to keep it in shadow and in darkness? And then how do I bring her out and use her, right? Like I need her. She fuels me and she pushes me to be better and to do more and to bring about change. And so I think for me, that's what my journey with anger has been over the past however many years it's been. I don't know really when that quite exactly started, but circa the last 10 years or so. But I'm curious, kind of, what is your relationship with anger today, which must look very different from when you first started sitting with your own sober
Yeah.
journey and all of that?
Yeah. This is so interesting where you went. I'm going to answer that. And I also want to hold everything you said that is so valid for me, especially given my journey. I have a long history with anger. I think most entrepreneurs at some point find ourselves either coming on the upside of the soil and being like, oh, I can use this to make a business and that's good. Or on the downside, or like, I don't fit in society, I'm a failure. They're actually the same thing. It's just again how you relate to it. I just never fit into the system. I couldn't do what others did, like the fitting in story, the template. I lived in a wealthy white community where everyone wore name brand clothes and you're supposed to look as I couldn't hang with that. I would just never. And I was fine doing my own thing, but I also just from a young age I knew what I wanted and I didn't have the control or power to get things to be the way I wanted. And so I just started feeling angry at a young age and that persisted through immature adolescence and adulthood. But where it brings me today, I think I started meditating to do exactly what you said and sit with it, literally. Because the best thing we can do with our pain is feel it, to be present to it. There's a term that I wrote down. It's part of the book I'm writing, basic outrage. It feels really important. It's like a title, basic outrage. It's just like the basic outrage of being alive. I think a lot of women have basic outrage. It's like the starting point is just like, I'm fucking pissed. I'm pissed. Now we're going to start, because that's like kind of underlies so much of our experience. I developed an autoimmune condition, which I've recovered from almost completely. I have it in remission, in my thyroid, which manages your hormones and all sorts of things. And I really believe this part of my body, my throat, my voice, was I suppressed it. I had a bad relationship with vocalizing because of anger, and these things make you sick. And that's partly because of the other side for me of anger is wishful thinking, wanting the world to be the way it isn't, believing it's that way, behaving as if it's that way, and pretending you're not angry in service of a world you want to be true, that now you're like, things I want to be true versus things that are true. So my relationship with anger, Sarah, is to live in a world of things that are true, but I'm not less dramatic. I just can't lie to myself as well as I used to. So the anger is more actually tangible. I feel angry. But what you just said about it fuels me. It fuels me. You are grateful for anger. I think of emotion in general this way, including grief, including humiliation, including guilt, shame, regret, all of the ugly ones, the horrible ones that we want to stuff over there, are truly just a vehicle for information. I think of our emotional system as having colorful flags, the color of sadness, the color of anger, red, to get our unconscious mind to turn toward it and pay attention so we can use it for something that we don't even know what it's for. Consciously, we have no idea. We navigate this tiny portal of consciousness when our subconscious mind has the whole game. Our emotions come from the subconscious to say, hey, Sarah, you're pissed about this, but there's a reason. Can you feel it? Can you let this flag come through? Can you sit with it? And then it's fuel. Now you have something. But what doesn't serve us, and I had to learn this the hard way, I still have to learn this the hard way, is when we don't feel those emotions. And we don't, by the way, have any training in society for this. Like no one ever took us to emotion school where it's like, this is how you feel a feeling without saying you're weak, making it so you can't function, embarrassing yourself, being stuck in those emotions forever. Like all the things we think are wrong with emotions, we don't have training in it. But if we did, we would do this. We would feel those feelings. We would cry. We would be angry. We would feel the humiliation and like let those things sit with them long enough to hear their voice and let it tell us what it needs us to know. That's what we would do.
Yeah, I love that. What's fascinating about this, and certainly this exists a lot more than it did when like we were kids, but and still not enough. But I was just thinking, this is the kind of activity, these are some of the kinds of activities we would do with kids. And this is where the two podcasts that I host are not that different. Because if you didn't know, I also host a podcast for Girl Scout troop leaders called the Troop Leader Experience. And it's all about creating a high impact experience as a troop leader working with Girl Scouts. And we do talk about a lot of times like conflict resolution and emotional intelligence and self-awareness and helping our girls with that. And I think that matters so much for them as kids, but it also matters into adulthood. And I think we do things like a happy face or a sad face for how a child is operating that day, or asking them to identify a happy face or a sad face, asking them to like, can you name your emotions? Like, how are you feeling? Let's go through like naming them. So to say like we don't have emotion school And again, there's not enough of this, certainly, but we kind of do for children because at some point we learned the definitions of those words, right? Of those feelings. We learned what embarrassment is. We learned, I don't know about humiliation. At some point we learned the definition of humiliation, but as a term in school or from your parents or whatever, probably not. But we learned joy, we learned sadness, we learned at some point grief, we anger, certainly. And it's funny because when we're taught to name these emotions in emotion school, quote unquote, what I would call emotion school for kids, we're also taught how to numb them and how to avoid them, how to hide them from other people, how to not let them interfere with our behavior, and all in the name of like kind of compliance and respecting authority. And it's interesting because I think that then we go through this process, especially working with someone like you and going like, hey, I want to unlearn this. And you're like, hey, I'll help you. It's like, then we have to go back and we have to unlearn all of what we did learn in emotion school. Like, hey, remember all those emotions you used to name? You still have them. You just learned how to mask them, hide them, bury them, mask them, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I want to be respectful of your time because I feel like we could talk for, but I think this has been so interesting and fun. And I feel like we just definitely need to have a part two. And, but I always like to cap off these conversations with the same question, which is it can be work related, but it does not have to be. What's something that's making you happy right now?
Oh, well, I'm feeling really present to you and our conversation. And I was thinking in my mind while you were talking, and I'm like, I have so many things I want to add to that, the nuances of this, how much you generate so much thought and what you put in the world is so it's just inspiring. And so what's making me happy right now, very specifically with you and broadly in the world, is that there are people up to important things who are spending energy creating something that will make a difference for people.
Mm,
And I'm feeling that with you. And
mm,
I'm grateful that I'm part of that. And I'm like, hey, I'm finding myself in this space with you doing what I care about too.
yeah.
And I can't think of anything better. Like, let that be the chain effect that we're all a part of. So it's
Wow.
about business, but it's like personally, this is what I value. So I value your friendship and I value your leadership in this conversation.
Thank you. And I received that and also reflect it back. Same to you. Thank you so much for those words. And yeah, I really received that. Thank you. And I think, yeah, that kind of on the same line, that's going to be my answer. Obviously, I can't say every time I record an episode, what's making me happy is this podcast, although it does. I think these conversations and connecting with people like you, and especially you, it does make me so happy. But I think, especially right now, and we're recording this mid to late November, I am one of the people who has struggled since the election. I struggled with the results and I've struggled with what that means. And I especially initially struggled with this feeling of helplessness, hopelessness that I know I'm not alone. I know a lot of people have been feeling this. And thankfully I have a community of people to know that I'm not alone. Right. And there are some things that people have said that have really resonated with me. One is I know exactly what I need to do today. It's the same thing I did yesterday. And that really helped because I thought I am already doing the work that I needs to be done and I'm just more motivated than ever to do it. And another thing that I heard someone say in the wake of all of this is what we need to do now is everything we can to make the world a better place. And I'm like, well, I know how to do that. I know how to do that. That's literally in the Girl Scout promise, right? Like it's in the Girl Scout law. This is what I do all the time. Both of my podcasts are working towards this. Everything I'm doing with my business is this. And I feel like this whole conversation really encapsulates like there is something we can do and we're doing it, right? So just let this be more motivation than ever to keep doing what we're doing. And it
Yeah.
still matters. And frankly, complacency is the opposite of revolutionary work. So the work was not going to be done no matter who was elected in the US election. Like it wouldn't matter. The work wasn't done either way. So
Wow.
we just keep going. And so I think the motivation of what we actually can do and how we actually can be involved in our communities to make the world a better place, that is bringing me joy and, more importantly, hope right now. So I hope that helps. This is going to come out in the beginning of 2025. So at this time, we'll be going through a whole new series of emotions as things shift and change and transition. But yeah, thank you for being here. Thank you so much for holding the space with me. And I can't wait to have you back for part 2, because I know you
Oh,
took notes. So we're just going to pick right back up and
yeah.
keep going.
Avid notes. Avid notes, definitely. And if anyone who listens who is thinking what is actionable from this, I always like for an audience to know they have an opportunity to meet with me one-on-one for an hour for free.
Mhm.
And I really keep that avenue open, because if there's value in that time to dive into their conversation in their journey that connects with us, that really matters to me. So that's an offer that stands for your listeners to reach out and make time to talk, to have a session with me.
Yeah, we'll make sure to put that link in the description of the episode so that you have it conveniently. But yeah, I love that. Yeah. And I can just tell the way that you hold space, even though we do different work, the way you hold space for the people that you work with, it's so aligned. I'm just so glad to know you. Okay, this
Oh,
was so much fun. I loved this conversation. I feel like warm from this conversation, and that, gosh, that's so good. So thank you. Thank you. I really,
wow, I feel the same. Definitely. Good vibes.
thank you.
Thanks
Okay.
for having me.
Thank you. So for you listening, we will see you here next week.